Past 1. The Investor, Narrative Retelling. The sleek skyline of San Francisco shimmered under the pale morning sun as Lena Vu stepped out of her Blacktown car and into the towering glass atrium of Skytech Technologies. A decade ago, she might have paused to admire the elegance of the marble floors or the quiet hum of power deals being whispered in glass elevators. Not today. Clad in an understated navy suit and a silk blouse that whispered confidence, she moved like someone who belonged, no, someone who owned the place. Pinned to her lapel was a small golden brooch shaped like a phoenix, her signature. In the penthouse boardroom, the mood was tense. Skytech, once a unicorn tech firm, now teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Their final hope? A mysterious investor who had agreed to a critical lifeline injection. Nathan Chase, the company's CEO, stood at the head of the table, his voice rehearsed but his eyes strained. When the doors swung open and Lena entered, the room went silent. Nathan's breath caught. He hadn't seen her in almost 7 years. Not since the night he walked away from their dorm room at Berkeley, from their shared startup dream, and from her. Not since he chose a venture capitalist offer on the condition that she was cut out. Back then, she was just the girl who couldn't afford dinner some nights, who stayed up debugging code while he chased investors. Now, she was the one signing his survival. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the chairman of the board, rising to introduce her, "please welcome our lead investor, Ms. Lena Vu, CEO of Phoenix Ventures." She took her seat with poise. Her eyes flicked toward Nathan, who stared, stunned. She offered no smile, only a professional nod, as if he were a stranger. In her hand was a stack of meticulously prepared documents. On her lips was silence, but in her presence was thunder. As Lena presented her terms to the board, clear, confident, unshakable, she never once faltered. Her legal team had constructed an investment clause so precise it left little room for resistance. Nathan, blindsided, could only watch as his company was pulled from the grave, but also from his grip. A faint flicker of memory crossed his face. A younger Lena curled on a dorm bed, laptop glowing in her lap, sketching out back-end architecture for what would become Skytech's core tech. He had forgotten that. Or buried it. When the documents were finally signed, Lena looked across the table. "Thank you for your trust," she said to the board. Then, without looking at Nathan, she added coolly, "Phoenix Ventures believes in reviving what others abandon." The meeting ended. Whispers trailed her exit. Nathan stood frozen in the echo of her words. He had once left her behind because she had nothing. Now, she returned as the one thing he couldn't live without. Past 2. The broken code, narrative retelling. 7 years earlier, the world looked very different through Lena Vu's eyes. She was 22, tired but idealistic, living on microwave noodles and pure determination in a cluttered dorm room at UC Berkeley. Posters of code syntax lined the wall next to hand-drawn whiteboard diagrams. She had always believed that with enough brainpower and will, she could build anything. That included the love she thought she shared with Nathan Chase. They had met over shared classes in machine learning and startup incubators. Nathan was charismatic, the kind who could walk into a lecture hall and convince 5 people to follow him into a failing idea. Lena, on the other hand, was all substance, long nights, bug squashing, and quiet wins. Their startup, Skytech, was a scrappy project powered by Lena's algorithms and Nathan's ambition. For a while, they were in sync. Until they weren't. "We're dying in here," Nathan said one night, pacing while Lena typed furiously, her screen filled with error logs. "We need serious capital. We're close to launching the beta," she replied, not even glancing at him. "Just a few more patches." But Nathan wasn't listening. He was already thinking bigger. A meeting the next morning with a VC firm. He had gone without her. He hadn't told her everything. When Lena walked in later that week to find their GitHub repository access revoked and her name missing from the pitch deck, she knew. "They said you'd scare them off," Nathan admitted under the flickering dorm light. "Too intense. Too academic." She stared at him, tears welling. "So you deleted me?" He shrugged. "They want to invest in me." They think I can lead. What about what we built? What about us? I can't keep waiting, Lena. Not for you to catch up. That night, he left with his duffel bag and a new suit. The door clicked behind him like a closing vault. Lena didn't cry then. She stayed at her desk. For hours. Then days. In the present, Lena stood outside that same dorm building. It hadn't changed much. A new coat of paint, a new set of flyers taped to the corkboard, but the same feeling of faded posters and cheap carpet. A young student brushed past her, earbuds in, carrying a laptop plastered with code stickers. She smiled faintly. That had been her once. Later that day, Lena sat at a cafe just off campus. She watched groups of students brainstorm over tablets and lattes. Her coffee sat untouched as a memory unfolded. The first time she and Nathan pitched together, Skytech's early prototype, AI-driven spatial computing for surgical training. They had been awkward but passionate. Lena had built the model herself. Nathan had sold the vision. It was their synergy that made it work. But investors didn't care about synergy. They wanted faces that sold. Back in her hotel suite, Lena opened her encrypted drive. Within it, archived code repositories, emails, photos. Among them was a private message from one of Nathan's former co-founders, someone he had also discarded. He used you. We all knew it. But you were the engine. He was the hood ornament. She reread her old code, the building blocks of what Skytech still ran on. The architecture had evolved, yes. But the bones, they were hers. There, in the metadata, her initials still lived. Proof. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Skytech's board had approved her proposed restructuring. She would be given full operational oversight within 60 days. Nathan hadn't even tried to block it. She stared out the window. The night had turned cold and foggy. San Francisco shimmered in distant light. What she felt wasn't vindication. Not yet. Just momentum. Past 3, ashes and embers, narrative retelling. In the months that followed Nathan's betrayal, Lena Vu disappeared. Not into oblivion, but into the shadows of every city that fed her will to survive. New York was the first stop. A place where dreams burned bright but faster. She took on a graveyard shift at a Chinatown tech repair shop, fixing cracked screens by night and coding silently behind the counter. She registered under different aliases, worked freelance contracts under the radar, and scraped together rent for a roach-infested apartment in Queens. During the day, she studied venture finance online and enrolled in free business lectures at Columbia she wasn't officially admitted to. No one knew her name, and that was how she wanted it. But hunger wasn't just a metaphor. There were nights she went to bed with only a protein bar. Her mother, a former textile worker in Ho Chi Minh City, had fallen ill. Lena wired what little she made to cover her prescriptions. Guilt became fuel. On a cracked second-hand phone, she saved one photo, her and her mother, arm in arm, before America hardened her voice and bent her pride. She moved next to Shenzhen, drawn by its electricity, both literal and metaphorical. There, among hackers and engineers in 20-hour makerspaces, she started to rebuild. With a forged ID and a refurbished ThinkPad, she built her first prototype under the shell company Air Systems. It was a hardware-software hybrid focused on predictive diagnostics. It was lean, elegant, and quiet like her. But she needed mentorship. Enter Dr. Liang. A retired systems engineer turned innovation mentor, Dr. Liang saw through Lena's mask during a late-night pitch session at a local incubator. He didn't ask why she used a pseudonym. He just asked her, "What broke you?" She didn't answer. But he took her in anyway, gave her floor space in his spare studio, and introduced her to a small network of former founders who had been burned by their own empires. "You think revenge will fix it," Liang said once, over black tea. But revenge isn't rage. It's resolve. It stuck. From Shenzhen, she flew to Saigon. Her mother had deteriorated. Lena returned just in time to say goodbye. At the funeral, no one recognized her. She spoke only once, quietly. You gave me everything, so I could lose everything and still rise. Back in the States, she touched down in Seattle. There, she applied what she'd learned, leveraged her ghost contracts, and filed for Phoenix Ventures through an anonymous trust. By the time it launched, she had a network of allies, capital from quiet backers, and a war chest of intellectual property she had spent 5 years quietly acquiring. Phoenix Ventures funded niche biotech startups, green logistics platforms, and AI tools for healthcare. It avoided headlines, hunted undervalued equity, and held silent seats at tables no one realized she'd built. It was smart money, ruthless money, her money. But Lena never moved into a luxury condo. She kept her one bedroom in Seattle sparse. One chair, one server rack, one suitcase. She watched Nathan from afar. His star rose briefly. TED Talks, magazine covers. But cracks appeared. One flashy merger, then a failed launch. A harassment scandal in his executive team. Skytech bled quietly behind polished smiles. Lena struck then. Her first silent acquisition was a defunct VR training firm, Skytech Supplier. Next, a controlling interest in their cloud infrastructure provider. She waited until their Series E round to strike directly. Through shell companies and blind funds, she took 42%. In 18 months, the girl Nathan discarded became the ghost behind the curtain. And when the curtain lifted, she stood in the boardroom. No applause. Just fire. Past 4, the clause, narrative retelling. By the time Lena Vu walked back into Skytech's boardroom, the pieces were already in place. The fall of an empire didn't happen all at once. It began with small cracks, product delays, a toxic VP no one dared fire, marketing dollars set on fire by blind ambition. Skytech, once heralded as the future of surgical simulation, had become bloated and blind to the battlefield it once dominated. Nathan Chase, still coasting on his early success and charisma, failed to see that half the walls around him were already hers. Lena watched the collapse with cold patience. From her office in Seattle, she read the quarterly reports. Their burn rate was unsustainable. Their IPO window had closed. Their leadership team turned over faster than a startup hackathon. All she needed was one trigger. It came in the form of desperation. Skytech launched a final fundraising campaign. They dressed it in optimism, hosted mixers, and promised moonshots. But behind closed doors, they were hemorrhaging. Phoenix Ventures stepped in through a shell entity. A modest offer at first, dressed as bridge capital. The term sheet was clean, clinical, and buried deep in it, the Phoenix Clause. A legal mechanism so quiet, so subtle, it could be mistaken for standard protective rights. It stated, should majority shareholder capital fall below 49% and company valuation dip below threshold X, Phoenix Ventures reserves authority to implement operational restructuring in accordance with its strategic mandate. Nathan signed it without blinking. The memory of that day was vivid in Lena's mind. He had smiled across the table, eyes bloodshot from all-nighters and pitch decks. "You have no idea how much this means," he had said. She remembered replying, "I do." Now, months later, that clause activated like a silent trapdoor. Skytech missed its financial target. A key investor pulled out. Phoenix Ventures moved swiftly. Lena arrived not as savior, but as sovereign. The board, tired and cornered, approved her restructuring plan unanimously. Nathan was stunned. He had heard rumors, of course. Whispered warnings about the Phoenix Fund with mysterious capital and military discipline. But he never imagined she was behind it. That the girl he discarded would hold his company in the palm of her hand. "You didn't read the fine print," Lena told him in the executive conference room, her tone clipped, eyes steeled. He paced, shouting about betrayal, about underhanded moves. She simply opened a laptop and played a 2-minute video, an old pitch of hers, from Berkeley, in which she outlined the core idea that would later become Skytech's crown jewel. "I didn't steal anything," she said calmly. "I built it first." "You sold it louder." The board backed her. Not because they cared for vengeance, but because she had vision and the money. Nathan was retained as a figurehead for now, a puppet for continuity. But he knew. Everyone knew. The company was no longer his. As Lena exited the room, she paused at the threshold. "Every empire falls," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else, "when it forgets who helped lay the first brick." And with that, she disappeared into the elevator, leaving behind stunned silence and an empire remade. Past 5. The Reckoning, narrative retelling. The lounge was dimly lit, lined with walnut walls and gold-threaded drapes that muffled the world outside. It was late, well after the board had cleared out, after the shareholders had been informed, and after the press embargoes were quietly distributed. The building stood quiet except for one room where two ghosts sat in silence. Lena Vu poured herself a single glass of whiskey and let the silence stretch. Nathan Chase, once the golden boy of tech, sat across from her, stripped of his charm, his suit rumpled, the knot of his tie hanging loose like a question mark. "So this is how it ends," he said finally, voice hoarse. She didn't look at him yet. "No. This is how it begins." The end was 7 years ago. Nathan leaned forward, hands clasped. The bravado was gone. For the first time in years, Lena saw the man behind the press quotes and perfect lighting. He looked tired. Hollow. Human. "Why didn't you just destroy me?" "You could have." Lena studied him. The boy she once loved. The man who had torn her future apart for a seat at a table built on sand. "Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted reckoning." He flinched. "Do you remember the email?" she asked, voice soft now. "The one you sent after the pitch deck got leaked." He shook his head slowly. She turned her tablet around. On screen, the message: "You're not enough for where I'm going." Time-stamped. Archived. Unforgettable. "I read that email every night for 7 years," she said. "I let it shape me, burn me, harden me, until I became someone who would never need to hear the words 'you're enough' from anyone again." Nathan looked away, throat tight. "I didn't know it would break you like that," he murmured. "You didn't break me, Nathan. You broke the illusion. I was never enough for your ego. I was just right enough to build the thing you needed and silent enough not to outshine you." Silence. He tried to say something. Stopped. Then tried again. "You loved me. Once, right?" She smiled sadly. "I loved the person I thought you could become. I love the idea of us building something together. But love doesn't survive betrayal. It transforms." He sighed. "So what now? You run my company and I. What? Smile for the cameras?" She stood, gathering her coat. "No, you rebuild yourself. Or you don't. That's no longer my burden to carry." As she moved to leave, he called out, "Lena, wait. Did you win?" She paused at the door. "I didn't win to hurt you. I won so I'd never have to beg again." The door clicked shut behind her. Nathan remained seated, surrounded by the echoes of a throne he never truly earned. She, meanwhile, stepped into the hallway where a Phoenix Ventures associate awaited with her schedule. Tomorrow, Tokyo. Then Berlin. But tonight, just silence. And peace. Past 6. The Fire Within. Narrative retelling. The ballroom was a cathedral of glass and light. Tokyo's skyline glittered beyond the tall windows of the Global Founders Summit, where titans of industry gathered in tailored suits and muted power. On the main stage, Lena Vu stood alone. A single spotlight framed her as the opening keynote speaker. No one in the audience moved. Cameras rolled silently. Her name had, over the last year, become a symbol, a myth whispered in pitch rooms and investor circles. Some called her ruthless. Others called her a visionary. But few knew her story. Until now. She took a deep breath and began. 7 years ago, I was erased from the very company I helped create. I was told I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong in the room. Murmurs in the crowd. Eyes sharpened. So I stopped asking to be invited. I started building my own table. She walked slowly, voice steady. There is a fire that comes from rejection, not the kind that destroys, the kind that purifies, that teaches you how to build with broken pieces. Screens behind her lit up, data charts, case studies, portfolios. Phoenix Ventures was no longer a whisper. It had become a force impacting biotech, AI ethics, and environmental systems. But Lena wasn't here to gloat. She was here to pivot. For every founder who was overlooked because of where they came from, what they looked like, or the silence of their credentials, I'm here to say, we see you. We're funding you. And your story starts now. Thunderous applause. Later that evening, Lena stood alone on the rooftop of her Tokyo hotel. The city pulsed below, alive and relentless. She held a small envelope in her hands. Inside, a final letter she had written to her mother after her death. Unsent, unfinished. She read it now. I built something, M. It took everything. But I did it. And I remember every night you stitched clothes until your hands cracked. I remember how you told me to be soft in spirit, but hard in will. I wasn't always soft. But I never broke. She folded it and tucked it into her coat. Her phone buzzed with a message from her chief of staff. Another founder accepted. Another deal closed. She smiled faintly. Work never ended. But the war was over. The Phoenix brooch, once a symbol of her vengeance, now felt like a relic. She unclipped it gently and walked to the edge of the rooftop garden. There, resting on the stone bench, she placed it quietly, not as an offering, as a closing chapter. Then she walked away. The camera pulled back. Lena Vu, once abandoned and invisible, now strode forward into a world she had remade in her image. Not to burn what had hurt her, but to light the way for those still in the ashes.